Well, welcome, Jon Hare. Thanks for being here.
Pleasure.
So you started Sensible Software with Chris Yates, but you knew him from a band originally, didn't you?
Well, yeah, we set up. Me and Chris went to school together. I mean,
Hmm.
we were at school, and I didn't know him very well for the first few years I was in the school, the first couple of years, and then I met him in the what was the old fifth year. So
Hmm.
when I was about 15 or 16, 15, I think,
Yeah.
we went actually on a train going to see a Rush gig. We were both with. I was with my friend. He was with his friend, and we didn't know each other. But our two friends knew each other, so we met on the train on the way back. We were all at the same school, so. Yeah, so we met, and then Chris and I set a band up with another boy from school. Uh, Chris was a good guitarist, very good at that age, and I was kind of like interested in songwriting, and I played a little bit of acoustic guitar and picked up a bass.
Hmm.
I could sing, and so we kind of fell into our roles. Chris, a more technical, great lead guitarist, me writing words, and us writing music together, and we just formed a natural creative partnership. And actually, the band, well, there were several bands with
Hmm.
different weird names, but we were in bands for all 4 years before we even touched games at all. So yeah,
Well, how did the games come about then? How did that lead into the games part of it?
I think it was more a question of necessity and opportunity and what was going on at the time. I mean, we were Chris and I both kind of dropped out of college when we were about 18 or 19.
Yeah.
It was Thatcher's Britain time. There weren't a lot of job opportunities, but there were good opportunities actually to set your own company up.
Yeah.
But one good thing that came out of those years were small companies.
Hmm.
I'm very much these days like a small, medium SME champion, and that's come out of that time. When we were afforded opportunities, and I kind of believe I think the world will be a lot better place if we were run by small companies rather than massive
Yeah.
corporate giants kind of like sucking life out of everything they can. But that's where we are right now. Yeah. But we were lucky because we Chris taught himself how to program and got himself a job with a local company. And I was around his house one day. We were making our kind of albums on Tascam 4-track
Right.
recorders.
Yeah.
I know you did any of that stuff. And Chris was struggling with some of the art, and I'd studied like more sort of art subjects, and I picked up the drew some wizards and dragons that actually look like dinosaurs when I look back at them now. But anyway, they liked my work and gave me a job, and that's how we started. It was when we were both 19.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay. So tell me about your first game that you worked on.
the first game. Well, the very first game was the Wizards and Dragons one. So
Yeah.
Chris was asked to make this conversion of a game called Gandalf uh, onto the Commodore 64, which for some reason was called Sod Off the Sorcerer with a V, like Sod Off, like it was kind of some kind of Russian thing. And that was the first one that was on the. I don't even know, it was a Commodore 64, it might have been the machine preceding it. And um, then I did a few bits of art just as a consultant artist because this company we worked for in Basildon in Essex, um, they kind of took gigs on to like to make games for people and then commissioned people like us to do the work. They
Right.
just kind of took the money, and I did something for a game called, I think it's either Firefox or Skyfox. One's a rip off of the other, and I did the bad rip off.
Right.
I did Trivial Pursuit. I did RMS Titanic. They were both for Domark at the time.
Yeah. Yeah.
I did some work on, God, what else? A karate game. I can't remember which one. I did some early work for international karate, which never actually got used because the programmer, unfortunately, it's a very funny story. So the original lead programmer for IK that was commissioned by System 3, um, suddenly did a runner because he was growing loads of cannabis plants in his garage, and the police rumbled him, and he ran away. And so the work I done on that, like some of the early stuff, the settings with, I don't know, Sydney Opera House, and I remember doing that, and I remember doing uh, what's it called, Sugarloaf Mountain and stuff in Brazil. I remember
Right.
doing that on the koala pad on the Commodore 64. I remember doing it,
Yeah.
but that kind of got my early sketches got scrapped. I mean, Archer McLean picked up and did everything. Then they went to Archer instead, and I think our company must have lost the remit
Right.
for
Okay.
obvious reasons. But actually, we did a game called Twister for System 3. So Chris and I did our first game together on a Spectrum, and that was a game called Twister, which was kind of like the remit was like Trump with a woman with big tits flying in the sky. That was literally what we were told to do. So we did it, which was fun. Um, and yeah,
That had a
that
bit
was
of
our first game. And if you press a cheat code, I can't remember what it is. It actually says developed by Sensible Software because we were thinking about setting our own company up at the time. We put it in a
okay.
cheat, but I can't remember what the letters are. You need to type in. And then
Well,
the reason we left those guys is because we discovered they were taking 85% of the money and we did really 100% of the work. And we were like, okay,
oh, right.
well,
Yeah.
we're
That,
not going to do that again. And then we set up on a government enterprise scheme, one of Mrs. Thatcher's enterprise schemes. That's how Sensible Software was born.
just going back to Twister. So that had a different name, didn't it? Because it was the subtitle was Mother of Charlotte, but it was originally called Mother of Harlot, I believe, wasn't it?
Mother of Harlots, yeah. There's some really good stories about Twister. Like Mark Kao, who ran System 3, is very progressive thinking, a very marketing oriented guy.
Yeah.
He's a very strong personality. He's got some very good points and some not so good points in equal measure. But he's really
Mm.
fun actually to be with, Mark.
Mhm.
And he was innovating. The ECTS show was full of like blokes in t-shirts selling you like drives and blank tape cassettes, and that was what it was full of. And Mark decided to glam it up a bit. And to my knowledge, we had the first kind of like they weren't exactly booth babes, but they were girls on the stage. So Mark hired the stage and put two things on. He put on he had the Twister girls who were right. I think they were wearing like swimsuits or something fairly skimpy and were dancing around to promote Twister.
Yeah.
Obviously, being the harlots, or they were maybe the mothers of Charlotte or her daughters, maybe. And he had international karate at the same time, and he had the IK guys were doing like karate moves on these breeze blocks. So on the same stage, so they're taking turns. So the stage was getting covered with these little chips of breeze block, and the
Yeah.
girls dancing had bare feet, and it became impossible for them to dance because of the combo. But
Mm.
it was quite fun. But these were yeah, they to my knowledge the first one of the first anyway booth babes in the games industry, and certainly more interesting than another bloke in a t-shirt we normally had there. So yeah, that was it. Those were the early days. Yeah.
Brilliant stuff. Well, all right. So Sensible Software was born. So what was your first game? Because I'm a bit confused about which was your first game when it Parallax?
Parallax was the first, yeah. So
Yeah.
in we did Twister. I think it came out in roughly November or December of 1985. Today, actually now, I think almost exactly now, April or May, we're in May now. This is my 40-year anniversary in the games
Oh, is
industry.
it? Brilliant.
Right, probably, within the last month or so. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So yeah, I'm a proper veteran now. Parallax, we started it when we set our company up in March of 1986, and we started making Parallax, and then 2 months later, we took a train up to Manchester to see Ocean. Our
Yeah.
first ever business meeting, and they signed it on the spot. It was amazing. It
Mm.
was really, truly an amazing thing that never happens these days in the games industry. But yeah, it was a lucky break. We got it immediately. We were both, I mean, I think I was 20, and I think at that time Chris was still 19. We are very close age, but there was a little gap. Um, yeah, first day, a check for £1,000, a contract for £5,000. Terrible contract. We never got any royalties.
Yeah.
But a lucky break. We smoked cigars on the train carriage on the way home and sung "We're in the Money," and that was it. We were having fun.
So you did a lot of stuff. I mean, you worked on graphics, didn't you, for Parallax and Twister, and that was both on both machines on the Spectrum and the Commodore 64. Is that right?
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah. How did you? Because it's not often. Because I remember working back in those days, you tended to get like a Spectrum artist and a Commodore artist because they both had their own little sort of idiosyncrasies. So I was always a Specky artist, but we always had like a Commodore guy. So how did you, obviously you did, but how did you find working between the machines?
It didn't bother me at all. I mean,
Yeah,
I don't come from a particularly technical background. I come from a very much more of a art and I mean, I grew up. My dad's a really good amateur actor, so I grew up around the theatre,
yeah,
saw everything going on backstage, all the directing, all the costumes, all the flats being painted, all the furniture stored up, the lighting, which was quite interesting and actually quite pertinent to games. Interesting the way you combine colours, on stage lighting. Um, and I've always, been writing music for a long time. I used to write poetry. I've been performing music on stage. I come from that background.
yeah.
Um, Chris came from much more of a different technical background. It was quite a good combination. We kind of found a fusion there. So I just saw the Spectrum and the Commodore 64 and indeed the Amiga like just different media to do stuff on, a bit like the difference between music and games, or I didn't see it any different. In fact, if you think about it, the Commodore 64 did have those like high definition two color
Mm,
sprites as well as the blocky ones.
yeah.
If you look at when we did MicroProse Soccer, the innovation there was to actually combine two sprites in one. So we did the color, the blocky color ones, and then we put a black overlay to get a
Wow,
high
yeah.
definition outline. So I think it's quite innovative at the time. I don't think anyone had done it, to my recollection.
Um,
Whatever
Parallax.
you want to speak about, yeah.
So Parallax. So that was a really technically accomplished game as well, wasn't it?
Parallax, yeah. I mean, back in the 80s, I guess it's not so obvious to younger people now, but there weren't computer games in your house when I grew up. I was a child. The
Mm,
first system in my house, I was 17 years old. We got an Atari VCS, and that was quite normal. That would have been in 83. And most people didn't have machines in their house. If we played games until we went to arcades,
yeah.
or you'd have an arcade machine in the pub, but we're too young to go to the pub, or there'd be in the chip shops. You could hang around the chip shop, buy some chips, and you know, play Space Invaders or Asteroids or whatever you want. Or you went to a little arcade, and we had a little arcade in Chelmsford where I went to school, where Chris's house was, and we were working and making music together. There was a small arcade by the bus station, and I used to get the bus home quite a lot and go to the arcade instead, and then get the later bus. Um, and go to the chip shop as well, which was next door, which was good combo. uh, and Yeah, I mean, my point here is we played a lot of arcade games, and the inspiration for games like Parallax came very much from the arcade games that we
Mm,
would see and play. The Japanese kind of arcade games, um, Nemesis, Salamander, those kind of games. Chris was really into those. If you look at Wizball, which is the one after Parallax, which we'll go on to next, I guess, you'll see all those power ups, all those weapons you power up is very much from Salamander and Nemesis. That's the inspiration of that. And with the parallax scrolling from Parallax was the same. But Chris and I were used to, I mean, our history, even before we got into games with music, we had this kind of like shared desire to like really push very left field and do weird stuff. And we got a pretty good following with our band. I mean, when we were like 18, we had played in the local village hall where we were, where we were from in the
mm.
more rural bit of Essex. And I mean, we had quite a lot of people from the local school come to see us and get quite a little fan base there for that time. And then the next gig we did after getting the fan base was an extremely weird gig. We both dressed up wearing dressing gowns and rubber masks, and as a two piece instead of a three piece because we got rid of the drama. I did something really weird, and people were like, "What the hell are these guys doing?" Like, and I don't know why we did it. It wasn't really self sabotage so much as like just wanting to do it because we fancied it.
Yeah.
And so we both developed this way of a fearlessness of innovation, shared fearlessness. We enjoyed making stuff together, and we kind of like by
Mm,
doing it together, you kind of like bounce off each other and build it up, and it become bigger and stuff. And we got good at doing that, and we had a lot of practice with music before we did games. So when we came to Parallax and with what else can we do, and I'm like, well, what about he can get out the spaceship and run around? So we invented this thing about him running around and like having little codes to go to the computer, and we were really, really, really pushing the memory. I
mm.
don't think this was maybe. I mean, what people maybe don't appreciate with programming on these different systems. 'Cause, I mean, you know, we had quite a lot of people from the local school come to see us and get quite a little fan base there for that time. And then the next gig we did after getting the fan base was it's like an instrument. Like if I've got my guitars and stuff behind me here, but if you got a guitar and then you jump to a cello and then you jump to violin and you jump to piano, it takes you time to master each instrument. And
Yeah.
for a programmer, especially in those days, it's very much the same. How can you master the Commodore 64 or the Spectrum or the Amstrad or the PC or the, Atari
Mm.
VCS, whatever you were on, because they were limited machines. The programmers normally, in my experience, I looked at watch people, they needed about to start to master, 3 games to start to master their instrument. And Parallax was Chris's first one. So I think no, his second one actually. We did a very quick conversion of something called Runestone. Um, we did a conversion from one system onto the Commodore 64 to get a little bit of money to set up our sensible software in the government enterprise scheme. That was Chris's first Commodore 64 to learn the basics. But Parallax was his first big game.
Yeah.
And we were very, very, very tight on memory on it, to the extent where the winning message when you eventually shut the computer down says system off. And that's the end of the game because we had no other characters left. But we were literally out of memory. So, yeah, I mean, but it was fun. I think I like Parallax. It's very, very hard. It's too
Yeah.
hard. It's
Yeah.
brutal game. But I like the idea of getting out and running around and doing stuff and having a bit of an adventure. It could have been more to it. It would have had more memory to play with. But yeah, it kind of set us on the path of what sensible software will become right from the start, actually, which is taking something basic and then pushing it and seeing what you can do with it, pushing it out there a bit. And Wizball came next, so you see that in evidence a bit more. Yeah.
Yeah, I was a bit confused when I played Whizball because it was to me it was a space shoot 'em uppy type thing, but there was a wizard and a cat in it.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's what happened there.
Okay. Well, how sensible software developed games was we iterated and we allowed things to fall out of what we'd done before. So we started off with we started off with 2 things. Chris was a massive fan of Defender. So we wanted this Defender style scrolling and
Mm.
that. And then I came around his house one day where we were working in a bedroom with Flintstones wallpaper. It was amazing. We really worked in the bedroom. And um, and Chris had done this like rotating ball where the ball goes round and round and round, and it bounces and then it flies off that way. The spinning kind of move at the start of Wizball. And we were like, okay, this is interesting. What do we want to do with it? And the first thing I did was drew a little like pea, like a green pea head face, like Wizball's got, to give it a face so you could see the rotation better with the
Yeah.
mouth being wide and we could see it. And that was the start. And then we were looking at ways to add the extra weapons like Nemesis, really.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so we started to add the ability to like stop him bouncing around and settle him down and move him about. And then we added the satellite that went round him to fire weapons. And then I can't remember the order this happened in, but quite soon we did 2 things. So we had the picking up paint drops. I think we maybe did the picking up paint drops first. So the picking up paint drops to, again, going back to my lighting background when I was at college, I like the idea of RG and B mixing and seeing an equivalent almost in the way that colors were constructed from the RGB from the lighting that I'd learned at college because I did design at college. So I was interested in how we could make different colors and the idea of starting off black and white and going to color.
Yeah.
So obviously we needed to collect the color, so we put paint pot like kind of pots to collect them. And then at the same time we had the satellite, which was kind of spun around and fired bullets to pick up the color droplets.
Mm.
And when we did the sound effect, it was going meow, meow, meow. And we're like, that sounds like a cat. Chris had a cat, actually, a black and white cat called Nifty, used to run around whilst we were working. So we just called it a catalyte. It was like a joke. So then we're like, okay, how are we going to show? So they've got this paint and this red, green, and blue paint that they're going to color the landscape with. How are we going to show the RGB being mixed into the target color, which might be orange or pink or whatever it was?
Mm.
And we're like, okay, well then I depicted them as cauldrons that the paint was being in and mixing a cauldron. So who uses a cauldron? Well, a wizard or a witch, right? They're the only people I know that use cauldrons. So then we had the idea that the cat and the cat lived in the catalog, so you could hear it again. So somebody else had to live in the ball. So we then made that a wizard, and the cat was the wizard's pet, and they'd together go back somewhere to show, because we needed a change of scene to show that the color was now, you'd fulfilled your objective of collecting enough RGB mix to make orange, and then you could now start to color in the landscape. So we showed them going back to some place to mix the paint up. The wizard and the cat, we showed them the ball's landing, they got out the ball, and then when they went back, the landscape was colored in. But I mean, I think we always had this approach that you can retrofit a plot to a mechanic. Like the mechanic was mixing colors up to change the landscape. Then we needed an excuse to do it. So we made the story about the wizard and the cat, and it was funny and it made people laugh. And, we put the little parking meters for them and all those bits of humor, all that top level. It goes in at the end. I mean, it's very rare that you plan humor. It's like you plan structures. And then when you're at the top level to make it more engaging and fun, then you add the humor as the top touch. And in those days, because the machinery was so stable, you spent all your time making the game. So whereas if we jump forward like 10 years from now, you spent all the time just making 3D engines. I mean, there was no time to like do these top level innovations and make stuff fun. But in those days, it was so stable, you could get something moving quickly, that we could do all the touches, like the words, the music, the pictures, the humor, the things that you remember and make you laugh and seem cool and innovative and give it personality. That's really the final layer. So I guess I had a lot of time on my hands to like make the images that we needed. And Chris was, when you got a two-man team, it's all about good communication. So we just talk about it and Chris will put it in, and there was kind of no, sometimes in teams you get a little bit of people blocking each other's work or not all working together in harmony or wanting to push their thing. We didn't work like that. We worked totally as a team in combination. So we would just do stuff and just put it in there, and that's all right. Let's do the next thing.
This all did really, really well, didn't it? And that was through Ocean, of course. So what sort of deal did you get with Ocean?
What sort of deal?
Deal, sorry.
Oh, bloody awful deal. Just like Parallax. Awful. I think we got 5,000 up front and 15% with Parallax. I think with Wizball it was maybe 7.5 or 8,000 up front and 15%, but we never saw any royalties. Ocean never paid us a penny of royalties for all three games we did with them: Parallax, Wizball, and Whiz Kid. Royalty value, only the advances.
I was going to say, because it got converted to console as well. So did you get anything from there as well?
No.
No,
No, we didn't. No, I mean, I'm now very, very much legally onto stuff, but in those days, I was 20 when we signed.
Yeah.
Parallax was 21 when we signed. No, I was still 20, I think, when we signed Wizball. We signed contracts with John Woods, David Ward, very sharp businessmen. They knew what they were doing. They were nice. Actually, John was a bit scary, but I quite liked him in a way. But they knew what they were doing. They were working with young people when the contract gave them everything.
Yeah.
Most particularly, I mean, the worst aspect of those contracts, apart from not getting our royalties, was that they would sign all the rights away, take all the rights, but you didn't have any way of getting them back if they didn't exploit them. So you'd give them the rights for every version of the game in the world, anywhere, and then they'd put about 3 versions out in England, France, and Germany, and that'd be it. And it's like, what about the Japanese market you've not touched yet? Can we have that back, please? So there were kind of like things that we didn't think about in those days. Yeah. It wasn't until 91, which was coinciding with the whole Microsoft debacle and Mirror Group falling to pieces, when we had to get involved with lawyers. Then there was no choice. It was a mess.
Yeah.
That's when we woke up about lawyers. And since then, I've done an awful lot of contracts. I'm very experienced in business now. But I still remember those times when we just didn't know. You're trusting the people, you're focused on your products. You don't know that people are there ready to, knowing you're like that and ready to exploit it. And we see it the world over. We see it with music artists and all the time, right? We see it.
Yeah. Well, MicroProse Soccer, tell us about that. Because obviously you've done your own versions of games, for Sensible Soccer. Was that originally going to be a Sensible Soccer?
Absolutely. It was actually first named Sensible Soccer by us. Um, it was influenced by another arcade machine called Take On World Cup.
Mhm.
It was the tabletop one with trackballs that really hurt
Yeah.
your knuckles when you played it. Some funny little stories about. I mean, microprose soccer is quite. I know it's just football, and football is football. We because we were aware that we had the propensity to be incredibly left field and do stuff like Whiz Kid and to
Mm.
alienate everybody. We tried to balance like more safe titles like football games with which we both like football
Mm.
with with more out there arty games that are not going to appeal with everybody. But MicroProse Soccer, yeah, Take On World Cup was the best arcade football game at the time. It's got some funny little things like it's got this bug where the ball doesn't go straight, but we thought they were trying to bend the ball. They weren't, it was a bug. But we added bending the ball properly. We added action replays for the first time. We added black and white football and inside and outside football. And it was really fun to be able to innovate into spaces in those days. It was
Yeah.
that was the joy of making games in the 80s and early 90s. There was so much space to innovate into, and there was such an appetite from the shops, the publishers, and the public for new product. Whereas now it's very conservative, really. If you look at okay, lots of new games are being made, but a lot of them are very poor copies of older ones, which are better.
Yeah.
And if you look at the public, I think only 10% of the mobile games played last year were made last year. The public aren't moving. The public want the same. But in those days, it was the opposite. It was like something new. Oh, look, it's Elite. Wow, I've never seen that before. Let's go and play that. Oh, look, it's Lemmings. Great, amazing.
Yeah.
We were getting all this new stuff, and we were all enjoying it, and we were all learning from each other and then innovating around that. Micro Soccer, of course, is a football game. We'd had Match Day, Eminem Hughes Soccer, Arctic Soccer, maybe a couple of others by that point.
Mm.
We were apparently the best sports game on any machine, according to CMVG, when MicroProse Soccer was released. Playing it back is a bit slow. The bending of the ball is a bit extreme. But it started us on that road of putting real football teams. I think we only had international teams in that
Mm.
game. Oh no, we had in the American six-a-side, we used American cities like Reno and you know
Yeah.
actual American places in the six-a-side. But yeah, we wanted to call it Sensible Soccer. We shopped it around to a few companies. MicroProse said they wanted it, but they wanted to call it MicroProse Soccer.
Who were the other companies that were interested?
You know what? I knew you were going to ask that, and I can't remember. We might have showed it to Virgin, Palace probably at the time because we'd just done Shoot 'em Up Construction Kit with Palace, which was our first number one game.
Oh,
Even
yeah.
more like a utility. Um, so probably a few, maybe. Um, I don't know who else we might have showed it to. Anyway, they offered us £30,000,
Oh,
so we
well.
said yes. They were a nightmare to work. They were a hard company to work with, MicroProse, as it turned out. But it was good, and it kind of set us on the way for confidence of making future football games. I say now, still on football games, 40 years into my career, and that was 1988, so that was 3 years in. But football games have served me very well. So
Yeah.
I've
Yeah.
I don't know if you were this. I've had a number one football game every decade. Um,
Yes.
so I really, really just want, the new game we're working on at the moment. We're working on a new football game at the moment. I just want it to get to number one for 1 week. That's it. That'll do it. That's 5 decades in a row. Then I can rest easy and go, well, someone can start wherever they want, but it's a bit of catching up to do.
So, well, speaking of innovation, so Megalomania, 1991. So because I actually thought this as well, right? So I thought the first ever real-time strategy game, except for Stonkers, right, which went back, 1982. I thought the first proper sort of real-time strategy game was actually Dune 2, but it wasn't. It was Megalomania, wasn't it?
In June too. Yeah, the problem is, right, the problem working with Virgin was that they had June. No, they had June 2, but actually Megalomania was with Microsoft, wasn't it? It was with Microsoft, yeah.
Yeah.
So American developed games got massively hyped compared to British ones.
Right.
That's what was really happening because we had it with Cannon Fodder as well and Command and Conquer.
Yeah.
Was
Yeah.
June 2 also Westwood?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah, fucking Westwood. Yeah. So, I mean, there's a few enemy companies you pick up along the way, and Westwood was certainly one of ours. And actually, we were quite like, I mean, we became very friendly with the Bitmap brothers in later years, but they were called the Bitmap wankers in our phone books. We didn't like it. We wouldn't tell us. So, we weren't shy of not liking people sometimes. And yeah, Westwood were a real thorn in our side because the Americans were hyping them up, and we were getting there first. Megalomania is the first game to ever have a tech tree in it. There was a game called Herzog Zwei made in Japan, which added mining and came out about 2 months before us. We didn't even know it existed, and they wouldn't have known we existed. But we missed out being the first game with mining for stuff by 2 months. We were the first one to like turn it into designing and tech trees and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And then Megalomania was a really interesting game because it really transformed during its development more than any other game. So it started off as a space race where you started off well into the future, making spaceships and designing spaceships and going to planets and mining minerals and improving your spaceships and flying off. And simultaneously, as you're flying all these spaceships around, having to like protect up to 16 or up to 15 planets from being invaded. It was basically impossible to play. This like humanly impossible. So we scrapped the flying around bit, which we've not done much with, and we focused on the technology generation. And then it wasn't until I saw an advert for Populous, I think it was Populous, with a caveman on the cover, that I thought, what about if we start the history in BC rather than in AD? Start it in known history and go through like, which Megalomania does now, which was go from the prehistoric era to like Romans and Normans and cannons and boiling oil and World War One fighter planes and nuclear weapons and all the other stuff they went through in the air. It was the same concept, but just taken back in history as opposed to forward. And it was more interesting because there's only so much you can do with spaceship innovation, and it's all made up. Whereas if you go back to real history, people can relate to it more.
Yeah.
So this was just literally inspired by, it was either Populous or Powermonger, by seeing the ad and just seeing a caveman in the skin again. We can do that. So thank you. Thanks, Peter. But yeah, I mean, Populous is another game you could argue was innovating in the RTS space or in that kind of space in a slightly different way at the time. I think we were just all just kind of doing our own thing. But yeah, the Westwood got a lot of credit for stuff they didn't do first. I mean, we were working with Virgin, remember, with Cannon Fodder. When Megalomania came out, Megalomania was the game that suffered for us when Microsoft crashed because we were number one, or had been number one for a while in the UK and in some other bits of Europe. And unfortunately, Mr. Maxwell jumped off this boat before we got our first royalty check. So we never saw royalties. They went with the way with all the pensions. And we lost 75% of our turnover for the year because of it.
Right.
So as a company, could have been quite devastating. And we went to our bank manager and said, "Dear Mr. Bank Manager, we've got, Microsoft, everyone knew about Microsoft. Luckily, everyone knew about Microsoft. So there was some understanding there. We said, don't worry, we got these two amazing games. And we showed him the two floppy disks. And he said, that one's worth 25p and that one's worth 25p, the two floppy disks. They were actually Cannon Fodder and Sensible Soccer, the two floppy disks. He had no idea.
Right.
Yeah. So, but yeah, I mean, with going back to Megalomania, I love Megalomania. It's a great game. It's got a lot of innovation, a lot of speech. Richard Joseph did brilliant work in it. It's the only sensible game I'd really like to do a remake of now is Megalomania, because it would be great to have it online. It would be a great online battle game, where you're doing it in real time and really being worried about being mute for real. Well, not literally for real, but it was it was, I think, apart from Wizball and maybe Shoot 'em Up Construction Kit, it was our first really, really good game. It was a really an innovative game,
Yeah.
probably our most innovative game in a way I would say, Megalomania. And thank you for pointing out, yes, it was an early RTS before G2, so we'll claim the first RTS as well. Thank you very much.
So,
So, but I mean, I think that Sensible Software as a company didn't really make it in the States. And I think the main reason is that the formats we supported. We were really an Amiga first company in the 60-bit era. We did Atari ST, we did the Sega Mega Drive or the Genesis if you were in the States, but we never really did PC. We got our PC versions converted out of house. We were never really focused on that. Um, we did Cannon Fodder on and Sensible Soccer on the SNES, but nothing else. So we didn't do much Nintendo stuff. So the formats which really resonated in the States were the PC, the Atari VCS, and the Nintendo, and then later on to the other consoles. But we never really focused on any of the platforms that were big in the States. And I think the American market was so keen to claim things for itself and so oblivious to what was going on outside, especially in Europe. In Japan, they paid more attention, but in Europe, they didn't, any of the British or French developers, they didn't pay much attention to what we were doing.
yeah.
With the exception maybe of Bullfrog. I think Les Edgar, who was a brilliant business guy who Peter Molyneux worked with, was smart enough to get them under the noses of the American publishers and get them known. But they're very Dave Perry, because he was the American guy, sounding American to me anyway, guy. But there were very few British developers on those formats that really made their mark. You needed to be on one of the Nintendo formats, like I think Rare or whatever. But yeah, it didn't really matter. It doesn't bother me that we didn't sell in the States. It bothers me people say they did things first when we did. I don't mind about the other stuff. That's say la vie. We've always made, certainly since the Sensible Soccer time, enough money. I've never complained about money. That's not the issue. It's more like knowing who did things well. And we were a very, very innovative team. We were groundbreaking.
Yeah.
And so, I'm glad we remembered for that. But I just, it's weird with games because on the one hand, you think, well, it's of course part of it's driven by ego. But when someone else claims what you've done, it's driven by out and out like competition and fuck you. You didn't do that as we did. Yeah, exactly. It gets a different emotion going in you.
Yeah.
So I think that it's always been odd, like probably for the last 20 years or 25 years, because a lot of the people we deal with now are too young to know what we did in the past, or certainly for me personally. And maybe people think you're being, especially because now you've got to be nice with everyone and treat everyone equally, even though they're not equal. Maybe people think it's arrogance when you're just saying, no, actually, we really did do this really amazing stuff.
Yeah.
I think that there's kind of like because that opportunity to innovate and do new stuff has gone mostly in the game space, or it's not gone, but it's hard. It's hard to do it with the platform holders strangling our output. So, you couldn't do anything really edgy and political right now because you wouldn't actually get it out there. You couldn't really do like what you could do as a novelist or a musician to an extent and get away with it in games so much. You would be very, very risky on a high budget to like put loads of money into something and say it's about politics and like overthrowing capitalism and all the companies we want to sell the game through. It would be very, very brave of anyone to try and do that. That's almost a problem right now, is that we are vetted now a lot more than we used to be.
Yeah, for definitely.
And I think that's another reason why that was such a magical time in the the Sensible Software era. It was all the time where we had a lot of freedom, and it was only when it was only when we did Sex, Drugs, and Rock and Roll, our game, and I'm jumping a bit forward, but when we did Sex, Drugs, and Rock and Roll, our game, uh, which ultimately didn't come out with Warner and with GT, we were okay with Warner because Warner liked it, but then Warner sold to GT. That was a Bible Belt company, and I sat down with Frank Herman, who was one of the great kind of like early publishers in British games. And Frank had experience working as a film distributor with the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. He knew what controversy was.
Yeah.
And he said, "Are you sure you want to do this?" Like when we said, "Yeah, there's going to be this blind guy in the elevator called Otis, because the elevator is called Otis. And when you're standing in the lift, he taps out lines of cocaine around the mirror, and then everyone snorts them." That was Sex, Drugs, and Rock and Roll. And he's like, "Are you sure it's going to be cocaine? Are you sure it can't be space dust?" And we're like, "Yeah, it's going to be cocaine." We wanted to, like, I don't know why, but at the time we were researching that. And he said to me, "You will be hoisted by your own petard." I remember him saying it to me. He was like, "There's only so far you can put." He was actually warning me. He was warning me and being friendly from his experience with the
Mm.
Texas Chainsaw Massacre. You can't. There's certain things you can't do.
Did I see a demo of someone on a crucifix getting a blowjob, or did I make that up?
Yeah, almost got it right. It's actually a really good track. So underlyingly with Sex, Drugs, and Rock and Roll, the biggest problem was the we took on a lot of leading programmers at short notice when we jumped into 3D with totally blindfolded with 2 feet first. We were very behind everyone at that time, and we took on a number of programmers that really weren't very good, for want of a better word. They weren't good enough. They weren't. I mean, had excellent, amazing 2D programmers making great, groundbreaking games, and our 3D programs were like a bit shit. Quite a few of them, actually,
Yeah.
if I'm honest. And we didn't really know how to manage it. We hadn't experience. We were 2 years behind the curve. Anyway, the reason I'm saying this, so when we developed Sex, Drugs, and Rock and Roll, we had like about a team of about 10 artists, all with their crystal graphics, mega expensive machines. And we had myself designing and a team of us working. And I was script writing a lot. It's basically a plot driven first person point and click. That's what it was, a point and click game. I'm a big fan of point and click games, and I really wanted to innovate in that space.
Yeah.
And underlyingly, with Sex, Drugs, and Rock and Roll, it was what was frustrating. Heavy Rain came out when did Heavy Rain came out? About 2010.
Yeah, about that. Mm.
We did Sex, Drugs, and Rock and Roll in 95, 15 years previously. And basically, it was Heavy Rain innovation of point and click and pointing on context sensitive cursors. Again, as someone who wants to innovate, what frustrated me is the innovation was lost. I'm like, and people think it was because we'd picked 18 plus content and it was too risque and stuff. And it was difficult in some markets. But it wasn't. It was the technology which let us down. The
Mm.
engine was just a disaster. We had all this art, all this music, all this script, and a fucking engine that couldn't run it or work. Because, and it was so hard because we couldn't. When you're when you're when you're working at the time on something, you've got to protect your team. You can't say what's going wrong. You can't say, "Oh, fucking programmers, I wish we could sack them or just kill them all." Like, you can't say it. That's what I felt every day.
Yeah.
Not all of them, but a number of them. But you can't say that. So you're kind of like, you're left not being able to tell people the reason why you're making decisions. Because as a team leader, you always have to protect your team. It's like you'll see it with good
Mm.
football managers. So I've grown up doing this stuff. So I know I have to do that. But it means that, the technology was a serious, serious problem. And what happened, GT, who were a Bible Belt company, wanted it out of the game. And they wanted out at a time when we didn't have much to show people. Yes, we did the video you saw, the blowjob and the crucifix. Actually, wasn't. It was sex and a crucifix. It wasn't a blowjob, but we
Oh.
could have got into that. But anyway, it was a music video because we'd done myself and Richard Joseph, our music guy. Richard got himself a studio in Pinewood, a music studio, and we were every week for a year and a bit. We were making music. We made a 32 track album to go with the game
Cool.
because all the music and the art was ready, but the programming wasn't. So what we could make were the videos. So what you saw was one of the music videos, which were like the reward scenes in the game where you go through a certain amount and then they get to the point where, I mean, that was a song, the crucifix thing. Interestingly, when we took it to the lawyer and said, can we legally put this stuff out? Is it violating? He said, the only thing he told us to change was the crucifix. We had to
Right.
change it to a star from a cross because
Right.
religious offense.
Yeah.
Everything else, all the blowjobs, all the swear words, no problem. The crucifix was the problem. But it was it. The game was like Viz magazine, or is that kind of humour. Very British, too British actually, because
Yeah.
that's British got such thick skins with humour, and everyone takes things so literally outside. You've either got Americans who take things literally because they seem too stupid to understand the irony properly, or you've got people whose English isn't their first language, so they
Mm.
just see the words literally and get offended rather than understanding. Is like deep layers of 7 layers of irony behind every comment, Um, and so I think it would have done really well in Britain. And when we took it back, uh, GT said they didn't want it anymore. They said we can't deal with this thing. It was actually quite a relief to us because we'd had a lot of money for it, and they eventually got tired of it, and we didn't have to pay any money back, which was great. But
Ah,
we
cool.
still wanted to keep it going because I'd put 4 years of my creative life into this at that time. And so to like suddenly have to throw it away was a bit heartbreaking for me and the rest of the team. We'd all put they'd all put 2 or 3 years. I put about 4 in.
Yeah.
But all we had at the point where we had to resell it and find a new publisher, we saw 20. All we had was those videos and stuff because the engine was still fucking broken. So we
Right.
couldn't actually show them the game running. So it looked like such a big risk because not only was the subject matter risque and difficult in some markets, but the thing didn't work. And all this stuff about he's going to do this and there's this story, you couldn't play it. You couldn't point and click.
Yeah.
Uh, and I never really forgave, to be honest, the programmer, particularly one of them, for messing up. When Heavy Rain came out later, it's like, yeah, we invented that 15 years earlier.
Yeah. Yeah.
Fucking annoying. I can't tell you how annoying it is. It's like, and actually for point and click fans, if they didn't want a game about a rock star, but they wanted a game about anything else, it would have helped to like keep that genre alive.
Hmm.
And yeah, it's just one of them things, I guess. But yeah, it was a fun. It's good to have in a way to have a famous game that no one's ever seen working,
It's a mythology.
including me, because it never bloody worked.
Well, it's a mythologized game, though, isn't it? So it's good to have a bit of mystery as well.
Yeah.
um, Sensible Soccer, right? So tell us about that. So you obviously you did MicroProse Soccer. So you obviously wanted to do a proper Sensible Soccer for, you know. So tell us about that.
Well, at the end of developing Megalomania, so we're back in summer
92.
91, end of 1991. Yeah, I just got a message. Okay. So back back then, myself and Chris Chapman, the lead programmer, had been playing an awful lot of Kickoff 2, I think, particularly, whilst we were waiting for the builds to load. And we had the weird Megalomania swirly music going on 4 or 5. Do you know the loading music for Megalomania?
Yeah, yeah.
Well, we had it when we were testing it. We'd have 5 machines with it, and they were all out of sync, and it was phasing all around. It was really weird. I remember there was a particular week we worked loads of late nights and driving home, like seeing double and stuff, just through tiredness, not from drinking. And that was what was going on a lot. It was a really hardcore development, and we played a lot of kickoff, and then at the end of it, I said to Chris Yates, right, let's make a new football game. And I dressed up the Megalomania guys in little. I'm a Norwich fan, so I dressed them up in little Norwich kits, and they were running around in the Megalomania world with all the turrets and mines and stuff, factories. The little guys in their yellow and green shorts and socks, shirts. And yeah, that's how it started. And then after we got Megalomania out, myself and Chris Chapman, who was another big football fan, we set about making the game work. Made a little pitch, Our first ever game in the office was Norwich v Sunderland because I wanted to do a stripy kit, and Sunderland, Jules, the programmer of Cannon Fodder, was a Sunderland fan. So and yellow and green versus red and white stripes with black shorts looked really good.
Mm.
So that was the first match. And honestly, the engine, it worked like magic. We spent 2 months making the football. It was played like magic and we never changed it. We basically ring fenced it. We said no one can touch it.
Mm.
It just fell together in a great way.
Mm.
Camera angle for Megalomania happened to work really, really well. It all worked well. It just gave us what we wanted, which was, my biggest criticism of kickoff is you couldn't always see who you were passing to. You needed
Yeah.
more vision. So it was just one of those things. It's the only time I've experienced it in making games that something just was magic. It just had it. We knew it. We knew it was going to be here immediately. And we actually signed it to Microsoft, and we signed Cannon Fodder to Microsoft. As I said, Megalomania came out. They had Megalomania 2, which fell by the wayside. Cannon Fodder and Sensible Soccer all signed up, and they all disappeared. We got it back, showed our bank manager the disc, and eventually sold it to Renegade, although Virgin were interested in acquiring it. Renegade had set up. They were a breakaway company formed half by Rhythm King Records and half by the Bitmap Brothers. So they'd kind of formed like a label for game developers. And we'd become friendly with the Bitmap Brothers by that point. They were no longer the Bitmap wankers. Wankers is drawn with a star around it. I remember it like Kevin Tom's head, like slapped on the box. And we just put as much as we could in there. We just put, I think, as a bunch of all the national teams and a bunch of the top teams in Europe, and we put it out. And it coincided with the release of it. Coincided with when Denmark won the European Championships.
Oh, I remember that. Yeah.
It was put out in line for that. I remember actually building desks in the office on the floor whilst that was happening. So it must have been around about the same time. And the game was an instant overnight success. It was amazing. But it didn't surprise me because the game was magic when it was made. It just had that thing. It just had it.
Yeah.
So, it was obviously quite... with Sensible Soccer was our 7th major full-price game. It wasn't our first. No, maybe more than that. That was our 7th. It came out in 92. So Sensible Software was 6 years old when it came out. So it wasn't like we didn't start off with it. It was our 4th #1 game, I think.
Yeah.
But it was the first one that really made us good money. It was the first one that really, and luckily because the Bitmap Brothers had helped to set up Renegade, we'd managed to negotiate because they wanted to develop a friendly publisher. We had a 50% royalty by now on that.
Oh.
And it was just our best-selling game with our best royalty rate. So we were just very lucky. And it transformed our economic lives. We could afford to buy houses and stuff like that because Chris and I both had young families. And then we had the other people like Chris Chapman and Jules and Stu and Dave Corn and people like around. And but it was still at that time, we're still in it feels like we're in a band era. Our core team was 6. We had an office in March. We moved to Cambridgeshire, to March in Cambridgeshire by then. We had Richard Joseph coming in. We had a guy called Mike Hammond doing the football data for us. We started to become friendly with him. We wrote the UEFA Football Yearbook. Our accountant would come in sometimes. But we were essentially still like being in a band. It was still the 16-bit era. A small machines, relatively small machines, meaning relatively small dev teams, which means not so much management. You don't need middle management. You just need great communication. We had supreme communication. It was great. So, and Sensible Soccer, of course, we were the first game to have players with different races. We were, my observation was everyone only ever made one sprite. Like everyone looked the same because it's about graphics and memory, which people forget. People didn't make multiracial sprites because they couldn't afford the memory of animating 2 different things. Uh,
Yeah.
with Sensible Soccer, we decided I saw a game with John Barnes in it, and it was white, and it was just like it horrified the sports fan in me so much I couldn't bear it. We needed to have so we did three types. We did white guys with black skin, white guys with blonde hair, and guys with brown skin and black hair. But
Yeah.
when you zoomed out that much, that was enough. And you put the number of the shirt above their head, that was enough to now look like John Barnes to look like John Barnes, which was good. Although I never wanted Liverpool to win, of course, but
Well, Cannon Fodder, that came after that, didn't it? After Sensible Soccer.
it did, yeah, yeah. Whiz Kid was in the middle somewhere there, but yeah, yeah. Kind of
Yeah.
fun.
So, Tiny Little Sprites, obviously, you got the inspiration from your other games using Tiny Little Sprites.
Yeah.
So, tell us about how that entire thing came together, the game.
Well, Cannon Fodder was an interesting one. So Cannon Fodder is the first game I haven't done the graphics on. That's the first thing to know. So um, as we were expanding the team out and running 2.5 games at once, maybe. Because we'd have had Megalomania finishing off. Sensible Soccer started after it. Cannon Fodder was running, I think. Cannon Fodder was a longer development process than Sensible Soccer. I can't remember which game started first. Cannon Fodder might have started just before Sensible Soccer did. And then Chris and I were still finishing Whiz Kid off together, which was
Right.
preparation, yeah? So that was going on. So with Cannon Fodder, it was inspired by two games. So our recipe at Sensible was, if you want to make a great game, you think in thirds, like third game A, third of game B, and a third of something new. That seemed to be the recipe. We'd learnt our lesson that if you go too far left field and it's all new, people can't grasp hold of it. So the inspiration games for Cannon Fodder were like Rambo, or games like Rambo, like a guy running around shooting people. But we'd also played an awful lot of Lemmings at that time. Lemmings was big around that time, and our name of the game in the office for over a year was Lemmings with Weapons. So we wanted kind of like a Rambo like character, but with a troop behind him, like in a group, and they'll do stuff together in a group. And that was the idea. So it started off with one guy with a gun, which was just like Rambo, but zoomed out with Megalomania and Sensible Soccer sprites. It became Sensible sprites, and then we added the chain of people and got the work out how they moved and how they shared the bullet firing between them, like because you have to fire this kind of volley of bullets in a certain way. And because it was the first game that I hadn't done the art, and I am a bit of a control freak, so I mapped every single level out on graph paper, everything, exactly where the enemy stood, exactly what was where. This is water. This is like I remember drawing it in Chelmsford Library at some point. I must have been in Chelmsford for a while, back in Chelmsford, drawing them out of colour pencils. So I gave Stu, who did a great job with the art, I gave him the maps and said, right, this is that map. And actually, what's interesting is because I felt a little bit removed from the process of controlling the art, I really focus on the content of each level. So I would say Cannon Fodder as a game has got the best level progression of any sensible game. Cannon Fodder 1 I'm talking about specifically now.
Yeah.
So consciously adding a new feature each level, it's either a new landscape type or a new vehicle or a new sound effect or something new. So there's always something which keeps you interested as you're going forward with Cannon Fodder. And then I think the game started to change and take its character again. The sensible approach, just like Megalomania, just like Wizball, just like Parallax, is about iteration. You don't have a plan at the start and execute it. You have a rough plan at the start and build on it and trust yourself to build on it well. So when we started doing the bit with all the characters lining up to go in to get signed up, we wanted that kind of a screen, and it was really like a status screen. So it said the home and away score. And then we had the graves. We idea the dead soldiers. And then we realized we needed to name the soldiers, because without having names, you can't really have gravestones.
Yeah.
So, And also in the list when you're fighting, who was who. These are five guys. So quite quickly this happened. Really, we decided to add names. So we started off with all the names of all the team in the office, and then added stupid ones like chalky and weird stuff. Um, but it just gave a bit of personalisation to your troop. So your soldier who ranked up, that was Dave who ranked up. He knew who he was because he said Dave and he had his rank. Um, and then, of course, we at the end of each level, we added the kind of like victory and the ranking up, the medals going up with the names. And then we were like, okay, there's an experiment. Let's just show the names of all the dead guys who died. And it was a bit like a penny dropping moment. So when you played a mission and at the end of it, you saw all the dead guys in the list, when we first saw it, we're like, oh, fuck. We just killed all those guys. And it really, we realized instantly that's like real war. It's a realization that's really what happens. You forget about all the dead bodies and we name them. So we did several smart things. Firstly, we made it so you couldn't click away from the dead soldiers. We forced you to watch the list of all the people you'd killed in your hunt for glory. Secondly, we made the rule of the gravestones on the hill that the bigger the rank they were when they died, the bigger the gravestone, which was quite a nice, funny bit of irony. And thirdly, we needed a tune and we hunted down. I said to Richard, I had an old track I'd written about losing a girlfriend when I was 18. So we basically used that tune, took the words out, just made it instrumental, and it worked. It was kind of a mournful song. And I think the combination of these things are like a mournful music. So you've got like a victory. Basically, you get the victory parade of the mission. Everyone's jumping. And then you get this really sad tune, and you see the guys ranking up, and then all the dead people. And it kind of captures that concept of war, like the glory and the destruction of war. In switching from the trumpet celebration music to Narcissus, to the soundtrack, just like that. Instantly changes the mood. And I think that at that point, that's when we changed the name to Cannon Fodder from Lemmings with Weapons, because we realized the game was actually had become about people dying in war and actually was carrying a serious message. And then, of course, we hammered that home by putting a poppy on the cover, and then finding out the British Legion owned the copyright to it and didn't like it. And obviously, I hadn't played the game and didn't understand that the game was about people dying in war and honouring the war dead.
Yeah.
There you go. But I think that what was really good about Cannon Fodder was it was interesting to play. There's always something new happening. It had, I think, the end of level 8 particularly was very challenging. Mission 8 was particularly very challenging. So it did have some challenges in it, but Megalomania followed by Sensible Soccer followed by Cannon Fodder was pretty good.
Not bad at all. When I was doing a bit of research, I came across Sensible Train Spotting. Was that a real game?
Yeah, it was. Yeah. The other thing to say about Cannon Fodder was actually the music. So we really featured music. I wrote this City War. It's never been so much fun idea, and took it to Richards, and he turned it into a great track. And of course, I don't know if you saw the CD32 version with the video of us as a team. That was just a day out for us to dress up in uniforms and make a pop video. But again, I think we were the first team to have a pop video in the game. But it helped establish the character. Yeah, Sensible Train Spotting. So, well, in the early days of Sensible, back in the 80s, 86, 87, 88, what Chris and I would do is after we, for example, done Parallax or Wizball, and we wanted a bit of light relief, we'd make a budget game. So you had those budget games like $1.99 or $2.99.
Oh yeah.
And we made like a game called Galaxy Birds and another one called Oh No, and Insects in Space. And we made these budget games. As we moved into the 16-bit era, what had taken over was cover discs, which became very, very popular. So we would basically, after we'd done a big game, and you've been like Megalomania was really, really intense work. I can't tell you how intense it was for a year and a bit. You'd like have 2 weeks just messing around making a cover disc. And in one of these gaps, we did Sensible Train Spotting. So Sensible Train Spotting is literally, our office was overlooking March train station. So we overlooked the train station. And March at the time, back in World War II era, had the most sidings of tracks in Europe. Like it was just one of those lots and lots and lots of tracks and stuff like that kind of
Mm.
station. And so we did a game, and the game was just a guy sitting on a bench in an anorak with a sandwich box and a flask, and the trains went past like this way and that way and that way, and between the gaps you could see the engine numbers. Then you had like a bingo card of train numbers, and you had to like cross them off to match the ones up on the thing on the screen at the same time. And then in the trains we put donkeys and sheep and stupid stuff just to make it stupid. And then when he won a level, he took a sip from his thermos flask. So it was fun, yeah. But we kind of it was just light relief for us. It was just like light relief after all
Yeah.
those years. It was a way of keeping the fun up. It was for anyone who's never worked in a small game studio, actually producing products and putting them out and selling them. I can't tell you what a great thing that is to like do. I don't know how many games we did in that time. And we were all talking about before 94, 95 when we got onto the 3D stuff and we faltered, as I said, with Sex, Drugs and Rock and Roll and some other stuff. But we had about 10 years of making these games, and we must have made, I don't know, including the budget games and the discs, we must have made 15 games probably in this manner.
So many hits as well.
And yeah, I mean, 2/3 of our games, 2/3 of our games were hits, were number one hits.
Yeah. Yeah. Amazing, isn't it?
The big ones, yeah, the big ones I'm talking about now. Yeah, I mean, it was we just hit the golden period. We were the number one game in the UK for 52 weeks between June 92 and June 95. That's
Wow.
a third of the time, you know. It was a golden period. We kind of thought everything we touched would turn to gold, and of course, in the end, it didn't. It turned to shit. So, you know, I think that, but having not had that easy a start, like with okay, we had an easy start in the sense that it kind of goes like this as an artist. First of all, you just want to be recognized. So we
Yeah.
made Parallax and Wizball with Ocean, and what we were lucky about is we got enough attention from the magazines to get noticed. And so you start off like just wanting that credibility, to be given credibility as an artist, as a creative force. But after a few games and making a few hits, you actually think, well, we should be making a bit of money out of this. So like we made enough money to like survive and pay the mortgage and look after the kids and that, but not much more than that, really, you know.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until Sensible Soccer hit, when we got that big hit of money, that we really, it changed. And I think what happened was in the Sensible case, because of our background of like, we'd just about made enough money to survive and it'd been okay, and we'd grown and we'd got a few more people in. But when we got money, what happened is people offered us more money to make new games.
Mm.
We went, okay, we'll do as much of that as we possibly can. And what we did was we actually stretched ourselves too thin, because suddenly people were offering us 3 or 4 times more money to make a game. We're like, yeah, we'll just do all of them, please. You know, because
Yeah.
we'd had the 4 or 5 years of not making so much. We were like, yeah, we knew we had to cash in at that point. And I think that you can even see at the end of the 16-bit era for us, if you look at Cannon Fodder 2, you look at Sensible Golf, the cracks start to appear. And the reason is because, well, they were both, Jules was the lead programmer on both, and he'd bitten off more than he could chew, and we'd overstretched ourselves. And I was meanwhile focusing on SWOS for a long time, which of course was a huge amount of work in 94. And then I went straight on from SWOS to Sex, Drugs and Rock and Roll. Both were very, very design intensive games.
Mm.
So I was kind of really distracted away from that a little bit, and maybe didn't have my eye on it so much. But also we were stretching our resources. And you can see that if you look at the output of the games, I'm not saying Cannon Fodder 2 is terrible, but it's not as good as Cannon Fodder 1. And Sensible Golf isn't terrible, but it could have been so much better. It could have been so much more. But when you start to like try and do too much at once, eventually it falls apart. And then even if we move on to our 3D bit where we took 3 games on, I mean, for anyone who wants to understand why we did that, I can explain it. So by the time we got to Sensible Golf, which was the last 2D title we signed, I think we were getting close to, I think it's about between 150, 200,000 advance.
Jeez, well,
When we looked at doing Sex, Drugs, and Rock and Roll and a game called Have a Nice Day, which didn't come out either, and the 3D version of Sensible Soccer on the 3D machines. And bearing in mind, our plan was we did Sensible Soccer on PC, Have a Nice Day on PlayStation, and Sex, Drugs, and Rock and Roll on PC, one platform each. We were being offered £1 million per game,
oh wow,
as opposed to 200.
yeah,
We were offered 4 times more to go away from the 2D stuff into the 3D. And it kind of becomes irresistible because, again, we were like, okay, well, we'll do that then. Why not? For us, the transition from 8-bit to 16-bit was super duper easy. We just assumed it would be the same. And we
yeah,
really underestimated the demands of 3D. We were 2 years behind the pack because we'd been doing so well on 2D. We hadn't moved to 3D early at all. And we totally underestimated the manpower needed, the technical knowledge needed, the middle management layer needed. We didn't have any of that in place as a company. And we went to, eventually, we were about 22 people. Interestingly, about the size, similar size to what I'm working with now. I like that size company. It's nice. You've still got personal relationships with everybody. You get up to about 30 people, it can still be quite nice and personal. And but we were just shooting in the dark technically. We'd gone from technically masters to technically being useless in like that.
hmm.
Because the money was so much more, we just said yes. And the market that the stores selling the games did not want 2D product anymore.
Yeah.
The publishers couldn't sell it, so we couldn't sell it to them. So we stopped making it. That's what really happened. And it's a pity. That was the end of an era. But it's interesting that the way that computer games work, you can never be complacent because technology and monetization will always throw curveballs and change stuff. Like no one can sit there forever and dominate forever. Eventually, it will go away, or their games will get like we are now, where games are. It's very hard to establish a new game now. It's all the big old titles reselling, regurgitated again and again and again. Relatively safe, quite dull, innovatively. Sometimes some great stuff, and some young developers now do great games, probably similar to what we were doing. But getting discovered is so much harder now. There's so many more people doing it, whereas back in those days, we were very lucky that the playing field of developers was relatively limited, so we could stand out from the pack more easily.
You've been helping young developers, though, haven't you? Because you've been working at Anglia Ruskin University as a visiting professor.
Yeah. So I mean, that's a weird one. So I worked for 5 years in the University of Westminster teaching. I mean, I've done lots of consulting roles and teaching and various other bits as well, which hopefully we'll come on to later because that's not the most thing I've been doing actually. But it was interesting to get into teaching, which I did about, I think it was about 12, 15 years ago in Westminster. And I worked there for 5 years teaching game design and teaching business practice in games. So this is like game design is like how you put a design document together, how you think about production, also how you write your job CV and how you go about working professionally in the market, and just introducing students to the concept of like being professional in games, which was fun for a while. I found it, what really made me want to stop doing that lecturing is you feel like you go back to square one again. You teach people some stuff, they get really good, they start to get really good, and then next year it's back to people who are back to square one again. And I found that's part of my personality. I didn't like that very much, being dragged backwards. And then Anglia Ruskin offered me a visiting honorary professorship, which I still have. But I've not done so much with it. I think it's because I got offered it just before COVID. And then COVID kind of totally changed the landscape. The deans and the vice deans kept on moving, and no one really instructed me. When you're working with the education people, they don't always understand that you might really, really know the business as an honorary professor, but you've got no clue about how to be a professor. No
Mm.
one's ever told me what a professor does, ever.
Yeah,
So one thing we did do for the spin-off football team, Anglia FC, we won the cup in Cambridge last Sunday, and
brilliant.
we beat Cambridge Assessment, who are the exam board, so that was good. So that's one thing we've done for the year. But I was actually talking to someone recently about it because I'm involved with, I live near to Cambridge, so in the kind of East Anglia region, we've got something called Games Eden, which looks after the developers and that in our region, and we've got this, we've created this map of all the games companies, and not just the games companies, but like the computer companies, like we've had Sinclair and stuff in this area. So all the computer companies in our region, and it's a time map. So you can drag the timeline and see, right, in 1974, these companies were here, and now we go to 2005, and it's these, and all the different games and stuff they're making. So we're in the middle of doing that at the moment, which is, I was talking to the guys from the Computer Museum in Cambridge about that, which is quite fun. I mean, I like to involve myself with a whole bunch of different stuff. I do music quite actively. I play in a band where we play at Pixel Heaven every year in Warsaw, which is a big retro festival in Poland. I think one of the biggest in Europe. So doing that again very soon, actually, next month.
Cool.
We did another gig in another thing in Poland um, last month. We're doing one in the museum in Cambridge soon.
Cool.
And I don't know if you know about what I've been doing recently, but I sold my company's house studios last year. Did you know that?
Yeah, yeah. So I know you went into, was it Tower Games?
Tower Studios, yeah,
Tower Studios, sorry, yeah, yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So, I mean, underlyingly, as I said, when you're making games, you learn. Well, I have learned the business side of it more. So
Yeah.
I've done an awful lot of contracts. I used to do all the contracts of all the people working for Sensible. I wasn't trained to do it. We learned it all when the Microsoft thing happened, and then worked with some lawyers, and then working with lawyers since '91, which is a long time. You
Mm.
learn that if you learn to do the work that they do, it saves you a shitload of money.
Yeah.
I kind of learned how to understand what they were doing and take templates of what they've done and change them for the purposes of getting people in on contracts, and it helped with both with publishers and with staff. Helps both ways, and it did help for us. With that background, we sold Sensible Software to Codemasters in 1999,
Yeah.
and I've since then I've done a bunch of uh, consulting for various different companies on games design and business. And in 2004, I set up Tail Studios with two Bitmap brothers, with Mike Montgomery and John Phillips, who was at the Bitmaps as well. And we were good friends, and it was fun. But we didn't. There was in the bad mobile days, the pre-touchscreen mobile days were horrendous, and
Mm.
we did get a number one game out of Sensible Soccer and Cannon Fodder actually on mobile at the time, which is one of my number ones, which is quite nice for that era. But nevertheless, it wasn't a fun time, and I took Mike and John. We were all consulting, doing stuff, and Mike and John as programmers got really good consulting gigs, and I had a really good consulting business going myself in 2008. I had three really good clients. It taken me about 3 or 4 years to build it up, so I was really happy with it. And then in that stock market crash at the end of 2008, I lost all three clients in a week.
Oh, geez.
And I'm like, okay, I'm going to go back to the drawing board again. And that was really fun, that era. In that era, I learned other stuff, like I made Casper the Friendly Ghost and Eminem's Adventure, and you
Mm.
know all this kind of stuff. And that came off the back of Codemasters, where I did Mike Tyson boxing and Prince Nassim boxing, and
Mm.
looking at some of the other games in there. So it was good to understand the license space, actually, for me to learn about it.
Yeah.
And so at the end of 2008, I phoned up Mike and John and said, look, our company, Tower Studios, has been asleep for the last couple of years. Do you mind if I take it? And they go, no, have the shares. It was worth nothing. Anyway, so with Tower, I then built up a business working firstly with some of my friends, uh, Atomic Planet, which is their ex-acclaim studio up in Middlesbrough.
Mm.
So we worked together making a couple of things. And then I worked with a company in Poland for about 5 years, and we did like a new version of Speedball. We did a game called Word Explorer, which is the first new game I designed in about 20 years, because that's how bad the license gap was, where you couldn't sell original games, and a couple of their games. And then I started working with a team called Combo Breaker in Helsinki for the last 7 years. And in that time, we built up Sociable Soccer, which is the new football game, which actually just came out on PC, PlayStation, Xbox, and Switch.
Excellent.
Last month, eventually, after 5 years being an Apple Arcade. So the game's been out for a long time, but Apple Arcade's like a cul-de-sac. No one really knows what's in there. But it's been really good. And now at the end of last year, it was hard. I mean, I'd been running the company the end of the year before last, not the end of last year, the end of the year before last. I've been running the company, and we'd signed up a deal with them. It's weird in games. I don't know if it's interesting to you, but like in games, you go through periods of like feast and famine. And the last 4 years working with the guys in Poland, after we'd done Speedball and then we did Word Explorer, the last 4 years, personally, I earned almost nothing. And then at the start of we started to make Sociable Soccer, and we struggled to hit the Kickstarter and stuff. And again, for the first 3 years, I earned virtually nothing. So it's like 7 years in a row of not really earning money. People can understand that. Obviously, I've got money from selling sensible software and from the royalties and stuff, but still, you need to keep things moving, right? And we got a little deal from a Chinese publisher who were interested in Sociable Soccer on mobile. So we'd always made it as cross-platform. So we switched our focus to mobile because there was actually some money coming in from it, because the Kickstarter hadn't worked. And then that just kept us going for a little bit, although it never actually came out with them. But that was okay. But then we got this really, really big deal with Apple Arcade with an American publisher. So that kind of like gave us big money in a lump, 2.5, 3 years into developing it, and paid for like all the years previously and all the years forward. And we did very well in Apple Arcade at first. Ultimately, the game isn't really an Apple Arcade style game, though. Apple Arcade football skews very male, whereas Apple Arcade is 50-50 male and female. Football is also not particularly what you'd sell in the States. Apple Arcade is 80% American. And it's very family market, Apple Arcade. And we hadn't really made the game that way. We had sort of hangovers from Chinese kind of like aggressive car pack stuff, which we then had to take out because in Apple Arcade you got no ads and no in-app purchases. So it ended up, it was okay. The game did well and the royalties did okay, and it did enough. So when we then signed a PC and console deal with a publisher, a British publisher, but to cut a long story short, for whatever reason, they didn't pay. That meant all the money to pay everyone fell on me. So all the team we've got going on, that comes back to me. And we had a bit of money in Tower from the Apple deal that we did. But I just watched the money just going down and 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 down. I'm thinking, well, we promised to get the PC and console versions out, so we're going to do it, and at least it's a completion. And so we knew that, if the worst came to the worst and it was really bad, we'd get out just about in one piece, and that'd be the end. And then we put out in November of, not last year, the year before, November of 23, we put the game out on PC, Sociable Soccer on PC, the first time it came on PC. And Steam, and it did okay, and we were promoting it for a while. It was a bit difficult, it was a bit tricky, but I put a small team together to try and do that, and some friends of mine, I'm very grateful to on the PR side, really helped us out to get that out and get that done. And then it was economically, nothing was looking good, shall we say. And then out of nowhere, 2 days before Christmas, I got a call from someone saying, I played your game, I'm interested in talking to you. Can we set up a meeting for in the new year? It was actually a LinkedIn message, literally on LinkedIn. And I said, okay. And I spoke to this guy on the 3rd of January, I think it was, just after New Year. And he said to me, I'm interested in buying your company. From nothing, from nowhere, outside of the industry. This is, I mean, now, we fast forward to now, what we're a year and a half later. It took 3 months to get that company sold. We spoke every day on the phone. We're getting on really well. We're working with stuff.
Mm.
There's a company called Sporty. So they do various other sports media stuff. And they wanted a games company. We just happened to align. We owned everything because I had everything owned. We hadn't put regular mobile out yet. Apple Arcade contract was just at the end of coming to the end of its life. PC and console were ready to go out. So, we've got the team down to maybe about 3 people.
Mm.
Now our team's, like I say, about 24. So,
Mm.
so we were just very, very lucky that came in. And it's funny how I've had this through my career when things you struggle and you worry, and then something that drags you out from it. And that's kind of what happened. And now, I mean, I've not been in a better place making games for, I don't know, since 1994, probably 95. I mean, it really is amazing. I mean, we've got this team has been so great for us. Sporty have been so great. We were working with the team in Helsinki. They were getting fed up with it. We transferred it to a team in Bournemouth. We've now acquired the team in Bournemouth, so they're working with us. So they're growing us. They can back us with marketing money. They can push us as much as we want. We are innovating in spaces which we can work at pace now. We've got lots of people, and we've got a chance of making, a really good, fresh, new football game. And we're starting on the mobile space this time because we started on PC console last time. We've now just put out PC console from Social Soccer, so now we're going back doing a new game. Obviously, there's some inspiration from Social Soccer, but it's very much a new game. And we've never come out on regular mobile ever on Social Soccer. We've only ever done Apple Arcade. So we are this year very soon about to go through our tech test, and this year will be all about soft launching. And then next year, hopefully we'll do our global launch on this, and then we'll, once the mobile's out, we'll go back to the PC and console and, spin it around again. And in the meantime, Social Soccer 25 is out there on PC console, and that's great as well. So we've actually finally getting places, and we're taking some really good people in with us. We got Kieran Brennan working as our publishing manager, who was
I know him.
active for 10 years, Kieran. So it's great to have some people doing that, and local James Woodrow, who's been our producer for about 3 or 4 years, is great. All the guys in Bournemouth are great. Dave White's been in our data forever. I can't say anything bad now. I'm super duper happy, and we are we just got a chance of making this work, and we're going to take a different approach to mobile gaming. It's not been the total magic that Sensible Soccer was, but I've got to say the latest build playing. I mean, in 2020, Pocket Gamer said that our Apple Arcade version was the premier arcade football game on mobile. And that's 5 years ago, and it's coming on and on and on. And the version I got the last few weeks, particularly the version I got actually on Sunday, it's amazing. This game is now playing better than any other mobile football game. We've had people playing it, assessing it for us to help us with things like monetization, which are a big struggle, telling us it plays better than any mobile game, football game they've played. So we know we've got that bit right, which of course for me is important because that's my heritage. The question is now, how can we monetize it to work in this very unusual market we are in at the moment? But I love the challenge of it, actually, because if we get this right, then we're back with another fresh football game.